So let's talk about rates and proportions. So what is a rate? A rate is a ratio of two related quantities that have different units that are being used to measure them. A very well-known example of a rate would be the speed of a car. We can say a car is going 60 kilometers per hour or 20 kilometers per hour, and so on. Essentially, we're saying a car would be going a certain number of kilometers per a certain number of hours. So let's say we specified a car was going 20 kilometers per hour. We could write this in fraction form as well. So we would have kilometers over hours, or kilometers per hour. So we could write this as 20 over 1, or simply 20. So let's look at our first example. Let's say a car was traveling at a constant speed of 60 kilometers per hour. Constant meaning not changing. And it was traveling for 30 minutes. Determine how many kilometers it traveled in total. This is a pretty simple question, but let's see how we would solve it using proportions. So we have kilometers per hour, and we know it's going 60 kilometers per hour. And it was traveling for 30 minutes, and 30 minutes is half of an hour, so we would write 1/2 as a decimal, since that would be easier, so it would be 0.5. And now we're trying to solve for how many kilometers it traveled, so that value is unknown, so we can represent that using x. So now let's solve for x. So let's think about this. How do we go from 1 to 0.5? That's the same way we go from 60 to x. So we can solve for this by trying to figure out how to go from 1 to 0.5. Well, we know 1 times 0.5 is equal to 0.5. That's pretty straightforward. This means that x would be equal to 60 times 0.5. That's how we would solve our proportion. And 60 times 0.5 is 30. And therefore, the car traveled a total of 30 kilometers in 30 minutes. And that's how we solve our question. So let's look at the similarities and differences between rates and ratios. And let's start with similarities. So the similarity between rates and ratios are that both are comparisons of quantities and can be written as equivalent fractions. So now let's talk about differences. So let's start with rates. So we know that rates compare quantities with different measurement units, whereas ratios compare quantities with the same measurement units. So this is our terminology used for them, and they're not to be confused. So remember when calculating unit rates that the final answer may not always be a whole number. So we need to decide whether to round the answer or leave it in decimal places based on the question. So a common example would be when answering questions regarding price. So let's see how we would go about doing that. So let's look at our second example. Coolmart is selling pop for $3.55 for 12 cans. And Nonstop Shop is selling the same pop but for $2.75 for 8 cans. So determine which one is the better deal and round your values correctly. So our goal now is to find the cost per each can. So let's start off with Coolmart. So we can write this as a proportion. So we have dollars over cans. And we have 3.55 over 12. And we're trying to find the cost per 1 can. So we represented our unknown value with an x. So how do we go from 12 to 1? This is pretty straightforward. We just have to divide 12 by 12 to get 1, meaning that we would have to divide the 3.55 by 12 to get the x. So let's do that right now. X is equal to 3.55 divided by 12. I'm going to do this on my calculator right now, and you can follow along as well. So you should get an answer that looks like this. 0.29583 repeated. So remember, x is that value, of course, but we're trying to find the price. And price is rounded to 2 decimal places, always. So we need to round this value to 2 decimal places. So let's do that. Instead of 0.29583 repeated, we would have 0.30. So, therefore, Coolmart sells pop for $0.30 or 30 cents per can. So we know our price at Coolmart. So now let's do Nonstop Shop. So we can set this up the same way. Dollars per can. We have 2.75 over 8 and x over 1. So how do we go from 8 to 1? Well, we simply divide by 8. So we have to divide 2.75 by 8 to get x. So x is equal to 2.75 divided by 8. I'm going to do this on my calculator. And I get 0.34375. So again, let's round this to 2 decimal places since these are prices. And we get 0.34. Therefore, Nonstop Shop sells pop for $0.34 per can. In our final therefore statement, we can say which one is the better deal. So Coolmart sells can for $0 or 30 cents, whereas Nonstop Shop sells them for 34 cents per can. And it's pretty clear that Coolmart is the cheaper option, therefore the better deal. So we can write our final statement. So therefore, Coolmart has the better deal. It sells pop for 4 cents less. Alright, now that we know how to round and solve that, let's move on to proportions. So what is a proportion? A proportion is a way of showing that two fractions are equal to each other. An example is 1/2 is equal to 2/4. We know that this 2/4 can be reduced back to the 1/2 by dividing both the numerator and denominator by 2. So two ratios that are equal to each other are called proportional. That's the term we use to describe them. And proportions are used almost everywhere.